Imagine standing on a dusty plain, the sun blazing overhead, when suddenly you see a line of soldiers stretching as far as the eye can see. They move like a single shadow, silent but unstoppable. And even when one falls, another steps forward at once, as if the army can never truly die. These were the Immortals, the elite warriors of the Persian Empire, whispered about in fear from the deserts of Egypt to the hills of Greece. But who were these men behind the myth? How did they create an illusion of invincibility that made their enemies hesitate before the battle even began? And why does their name still echo through the corridors of history? Today, on Legacy of Empires, you and I will journey back in time to uncover the real story of the Persian Immortals, their fierce discipline, their clever battle tactics, and the unique part they played in building what was once the greatest empire on Earth. Grab your curiosity and let's step into the world of legends together. If you love stories where history feels alive, don't forget to hit like, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to Legacy of Empires. We have so many more ancient adventures waiting for you. Picture this. The year is around 515 before Christ, and Darius I sits on his golden throne in Persepolis, facing a problem that would make any ruler lose sleep. His vast empire stretches from the scorching deserts of Egypt to the snow-capped mountains of Central Asia. But how do you protect something so immense? How do you create a force so reliable, so utterly dependable, that your enemies tremble at the mere mention of their name? Darius had his answer, and it was brilliant in its simplicity. He would create an elite guard of exactly 10,000 men. Not 9,999, not 10,001. Exactly 10,000. Always. But here's where the story gets fascinating. These weren't just any soldiers plucked from the streets of Babylon or the farms of Media. These were the cream of the crop, hand-picked from every corner of the empire. Persian nobles, yes, but also the finest warriors from conquered lands who had proven their loyalty beyond question. Each man had to demonstrate not just skill with weapons, but unwavering devotion to the king and the empire. The genius of Darius lay not just in their training, but in their mystique. You see, whenever one of these elite soldiers fell in battle, became too old to fight, or was injured beyond recovery, another would immediately step into his place. The replacement would don the same distinctive armor, carry the same ceremonial weapons, and assume the same position in the ranks. To outsiders watching from enemy lines, it appeared as if the Persian guard never diminished, never weakened, never truly died. Imagine being a Greek hoplite or a Scythian horseman. Watching this formation advance toward you, you might strike down 5, 10, even 20 of them, but when the dust settled and you looked again, there were still exactly 10,000 spears glinting in the sun. It was psychological warfare at its finest, and it worked like a charm. Now let's talk about those weapons, because they were truly something to behold. Each immortal carried a spear unlike any other in the ancient world. The spearhead wasn't made of ordinary iron or bronze, but gleaming silver that could blind enemies when it caught the morning sun. But the real masterpiece was at the other end. Where most soldiers had simple wooden butts on their spears, the Immortals carried golden pomegranates. Yes, you heard that right. Golden pomegranates. These weren't just decorative pieces either. In Persian culture, the pomegranate symbolized fertility, abundance, and eternal life. Every time an immortal raised his spear, he was literally holding up a symbol of the empire's undying strength. Picture 10,000 of these spears moving in perfect unison across a battlefield. The silver tips would create a dazzling display of light, while the golden pomegranates would catch and reflect the sun's rays, creating an almost supernatural glow around the entire formation. Enemy soldiers often reported that fighting the Immortals was like battling against the sun itself. But here's a detail that most people don't know. These weren't just ceremonial weapons. The silver wasn't chosen for its beauty alone. Silver holds a sharper edge than bronze and doesn't rust like iron. These spears were as deadly as they were beautiful, a perfect blend of form and function that epitomized Persian craftsmanship. The Immortals would often practice a maneuver where they would simultaneously raise their spears and pivot them toward the sun, creating a blinding flash that could disorient entire enemy formations. It was a tactic that combined their signature weapons with battlefield psychology, turning their very equipment into a weapon of war. And when they marched, oh, when they marched, 10,000 silver spear tips glinting, 10,000 golden pomegranates catching the light, moving with such precision that witnesses described it as watching a river of liquid metal flow across the landscape. No wonder their enemies called them the army that never died. Now, if you thought their weapons were impressive, wait until you see how these warriors dressed for battle. The Immortals weren't just soldiers. They were walking works of art, each one a testament to Persian wealth and sophistication. Imagine stepping into their armory for the first time. The first thing that would catch your eye wouldn't be gleaming steel or bronze, but the most beautiful embroidered tunics you've ever seen. These weren't simple military garments, but masterpieces of textile art. Skilled Persian weavers would spend months creating intricate patterns that told stories of ancient victories, mythical beasts, and royal genealogies. Golden threads would dance across rich purple and crimson fabrics, creating designs so complex that enemy soldiers would sometimes pause mid-battle just to stare in amazement. But beneath these stunning tunics lay something far more practical and deadly: scale armor that moved like liquid metal. Each scale was individually crafted and fitted, creating a protective shell that could deflect arrows while allowing complete freedom of movement. The scales weren't just randomly placed either. Persian armorers had perfected a technique where each piece overlapped its neighbors at precisely the right angle, creating a surface that would cause enemy weapons to glance off, rather than penetrate. The real genius, though, was in their shields. While Greek hoplites carried heavy bronze shields that could stop almost anything but left them exhausted after hours of fighting, the Immortals used wicker shields that seemed almost too delicate for war. But here's the fascinating part. These shields were soaked in a special resin that made them incredibly tough, while keeping them light enough that a warrior could fight all day without fatigue. The wicker could actually absorb the impact of arrows better than solid metal, and if damaged, could be quickly repaired on the battlefield. Here's where the Immortals truly separated themselves from every other fighting force of their time. Most ancient armies specialized in one type of combat. Greek hoplites were masters of close formation fighting. Scythian horsemen were unmatched with their bows. Egyptian charioteers dominated open battlefields. But the Immortals? They were expected to excel at everything. Picture a young Persian noble beginning his training to join the Immortals. His day would start before dawn with archery practice, learning to shoot accurately while running, while mounted, even while falling backward. The Persian bow was a marvel of engineering, capable of sending arrows farther and with more power than almost any other weapon of its time. An immortal was expected to hit a target the size of a man's head at 200 paces, and they practiced until they could do it in their sleep. After archery came sword work, but not just any sword work. They trained with curved blades that could slice through armor, straight swords for thrusting attacks, and even short daggers for close-quarters combat. Each weapon required different footwork, different timing, different ways of thinking about distance and opportunity. Then came spear training, and this is where things got really interesting. The Immortals didn't just learn to use spears in tight formations like the Greeks. They practiced throwing them with deadly accuracy, using them as staffs for hand-to-hand combat, and even fighting with a spear in one hand and a sword in the other. They could switch seamlessly between weapons mid-fight, adapting to whatever the battlefield demanded. But perhaps most impressively, they learned to do all of this while maintaining perfect formation. 10,000 men moving as one, each capable of individual brilliance, but disciplined enough to function as a single, unstoppable force. Now here's where the story takes a turn that would make even modern military officers shake their heads in disbelief. The Greek historian Herodotus, who actually witnessed these warriors in action, recorded something that seemed almost impossible to believe. The Immortals traveled with a luxury that would make Roman emperors jealous. While other armies marched with basic supplies and slept on the ground, the Immortals traveled with entire caravans of servants whose only job was to ensure their comfort. We're talking about hundreds of attendants who carried fine wines from the hills of Shiraz, exotic spices from India and Central Asia, and delicacies that most people of that era never even dreamed of tasting. But it gets even more remarkable. These warriors, these supposedly hardened soldiers, traveled with personal servants who would set up comfortable camps complete with carpets, cushions, and even portable bathing facilities. While Greek soldiers were eating barley porridge and drinking watered wine, the Immortals were dining on roasted lambs seasoned with saffron and cinnamon, drinking wine that had been aged in cedar barrels. And yes, Herodotus mentions something that would scandalize more austere military traditions. Many of the Immortals traveled with female companions, creating a mobile court that moved with the army. This wasn't just about comfort, though. It was about maintaining the dignity and status that these elite warriors were expected to embody. They weren't just soldiers, they were representatives of Persian civilization itself. Imagine the psychological impact on enemies who expected to face a ragged, exhausted army, only to encounter warriors who looked like they had just stepped out of a royal palace. The Immortals would arrive at battles not just well-rested and well-fed, but actually looking forward to the fight. Confident in their superiority, not just in weapons and training, but in every aspect of civilized life. This luxury wasn't weakness, it was strategy. A well-cared-for soldier fights better, thinks more clearly, and projects the kind of confidence that can break enemy morale before the first arrow is even fired. Are you interested in this ancient story? Then leave a comment, click like, share with other history lovers, and subscribe to Legacy of Empires so you don't miss our next journey through the past. The year was 480 before Christ, and the narrow pass of Thermopylae was about to become the stage for one of history's most legendary confrontations. But here's what most people don't realize about this famous battle. It wasn't just a story about 300 brave Spartans making their last stand. It was the moment when the Persian Immortals faced their most challenging opponent yet, and ultimately proved why they had earned their fearsome reputation. King Xerxes had brought the largest army the world had ever seen to conquer Greece. Historians estimate it numbered in the hundreds of thousands, with warriors from every corner of the Persian Empire. But at the heart of this massive force, serving as both the king's personal guard and his most trusted strike force, marched the 10,000 Immortals. Picture the scene as they approached the narrow coastal pass. The Immortals had conquered cities, defeated armies, and expanded the empire across 3 continents. They had never met a force they couldn't overcome, never faced a challenge they couldn't solve with their combination of skill, discipline, and sheer overwhelming presence. And now they found themselves staring at a handful of Greek warriors who refused to step aside. For 2 days, something unprecedented happened. The Immortals, these supposedly invincible warriors, threw themselves against the Spartan phalanx and were repelled. Not defeated, mind you, but stopped cold. The narrow pass negated their numbers, and the Spartan bronze shields and long spears created a wall that seemed impenetrable. But here's where the true genius of the Immortals shone through. While other commanders might have continued the same futile frontal assault, the Immortal commanders did what they did best. They adapted. They had spent years training for exactly this kind of situation, learning to think beyond conventional tactics. The breakthrough came when a local Greek named Ephialtes offered to show the Persians a secret mountain path that would allow them to circle around behind the Spartan position. Most armies would have sent a few scouts or a small detachment to investigate. But Xerxes made a decision that showed just how much he trusted his elite guard. He sent the Immortals themselves. Imagine being one of those warriors, leaving the main battlefield in the dead of night to climb treacherous mountain paths in complete darkness. These weren't mountain troops or specialized climbers. These were palace guards, men accustomed to fighting on level ground with perfect formations. But their training had taught them to excel in any situation, and that's exactly what they did. The night march was a masterpiece of military precision. 10,000 men moved through narrow mountain trails without alerting the small Greek force guarding the path. When dawn broke, the Immortals had accomplished something that seemed impossible. They had outmaneuvered the unmovable Spartans. As the sun rose on the third day of battle, King Leonidas and his 300 warriors found themselves facing Persian spears from both front and rear. The Immortals hadn't just broken the deadlock, they had turned the entire battle into a masterclass of tactical flexibility. The Spartans, for all their courage and skill, were trapped. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. Even in victory, the Immortals showed the discipline and professionalism that had made them legendary. There was no massacre, no unnecessary cruelty. They had accomplished their mission with the efficiency and honor that Darius had built into their very foundation. Now, let's talk about one of the biggest myths that Hollywood has given us about this battle. You've probably seen the movie where Xerxes sits on an enormous golden throne watching the battle like some kind of ancient sports spectacle. It makes for great cinema, but the reality was far more interesting and, honestly, more impressive. The real Xerxes was right there with his army, close enough to the fighting that he could smell the dust and hear the clash of weapons. Ancient sources tell us that he set up his command post on a hill overlooking the battlefield. But this wasn't some luxurious viewing platform. It was a working military headquarters where he could receive reports, give orders, and coordinate the movements of his massive army. More importantly, the Immortals were never just ceremonial guards standing around a throne. They were Xerxes' most trusted advisors, his tactical brain trust, and his personal protection, all rolled into one. When the king needed a critical mission accomplished, like that night march around Thermopylae, he turned to the Immortals because he knew they would find a way to make it happen. The historical Xerxes was a hands-on military commander who had inherited not just an empire, but a military tradition that valued intelligence, adaptability, and personal courage. He didn't need a golden throne to project power. He had 10,000 of the world's finest warriors who would follow him anywhere and accomplish any mission he set before them. But Thermopylae was just one chapter in the Immortals' story. These warriors had been the backbone of Persian expansion for decades before they ever met the Spartans, and they continued to serve the empire long after the Greek wars ended. They had marched with Cyrus the Great when he conquered Babylon, one of the most fortified cities in the ancient world. They had crossed the Hindu Kush mountains to bring Persian rule to the edges of India. They had fought in the deserts of Egypt and the steppes of Central Asia, adapting their tactics to every terrain and every enemy they encountered. Each of these campaigns had taught them something new, added another layer to their legendary versatility. By the time they reached Thermopylae, they weren't just skilled warriors, they were living libraries of military knowledge, each man carrying the experience of dozens of battles and countless tactical innovations. The flanking maneuver at Thermopylae wasn't just a lucky break or a moment of inspiration. It was the culmination of years of training that had taught them to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles, to find solutions where others found only problems. That's the real legacy of the Immortals. Not just their individual skill or their impressive equipment, but their ability to think, adapt, and overcome any challenge through discipline, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to their mission. The year was 331 before Christ, and the plains of Gaugamela in modern-day Iraq were about to witness the end of an era. For nearly 2 centuries, the Persian Immortals had been the beating heart of the world's greatest empire. They had conquered nations, toppled kingdoms, and created a legend that seemed as permanent as the mountains of Persia itself. But now, for the first time in their storied history, they were about to face a force that would prove even their mystique had limits. Alexander of Macedon had already shattered 2 Persian armies, but this time was different. This time, he faced the full might of the Persian Empire, and at its center stood the 10,000 Immortals, still maintaining their ancient traditions, still replacing their fallen with fresh warriors, still projecting that aura of invincibility that had terrorized enemies for generations. But something had changed in the world of warfare. Alexander brought with him not just superior tactics, but a new philosophy of combat. Where the Persians had created an army of individual excellence, held together by discipline and tradition, Alexander had forged something entirely different, a military machine where every part worked in perfect harmony with every other part. The battle itself was a masterpiece of strategic planning meeting raw courage. The Immortals fought with all the skill and determination that had made them legendary. They maintained their formations, adapted to changing circumstances, and showed the kind of professional excellence that had conquered half the known world. But for the first time, it wasn't enough. When the dust settled and the last Persian horn sounded retreat, the Immortals had suffered their first true defeat. Not because they had grown weak or lost their edge, but because the world had changed around them. The age of great empires built on elite warrior castes was giving way to something new, something that would eventually become the foundation of modern military thinking. But here's what makes the story of the Immortals truly remarkable. Their defeat at Gaugamela wasn't really about military tactics or superior weapons. It was about the end of an entire way of thinking about power, about empire, about what it meant to rule the world. The Immortals had never been just soldiers. They were the living embodiment of Persian civilization itself. When they marched into battle wearing their embroidered tunics and carrying their silver-tipped spears, they carried with them the artistic achievements of Persian craftsmen, the organizational genius of Persian administrators, and the cultural sophistication of Persian court life. Think about it. These warriors had helped create the world's first truly multicultural empire. Under their protection, Persian kings had built roads that connected India to Greece, established postal systems that could carry messages across continents, and created administrative structures that allowed people of dozens of different languages and cultures to live together in relative peace. In an ancient world, where war was often little more than organized chaos, where armies were collections of individual warriors fighting for personal glory, the Immortals had brought something revolutionary. The idea that military force could be both beautiful and terrible, both disciplined and devastating, both honorable and utterly effective. They had shown that an army could be more than the sum of its parts, that 10,000 individuals could become something greater through shared purpose and mutual dedication. In many ways, they had invented the very concept of professional military service as we understand it today. This brings us to one of the most fascinating questions in all of military history. What made the Immortals truly legendary? Was it their undeniable skill with weapons, their years of rigorous training, their superior equipment and tactics? Or was it something more subtle and perhaps more powerful? Their ability to project an image of invincibility that could break enemy morale before the first arrow was fired. The truth is probably somewhere in between, and that's what makes their story so compelling. The Immortals were genuinely skilled warriors who could have held their own against any fighting force in the ancient world. But they were also master psychologists who understood that winning battles was as much about what happened in the enemy's mind as what happened on the battlefield. That constant replacement system, where a fallen warrior would be instantly replaced by someone wearing identical armor and carrying identical weapons, was genius precisely because it operated on both levels. It ensured that the unit maintained its fighting effectiveness, but it also created a psychological weapon that was perhaps even more powerful than their silver-tipped spears. Imagine being an enemy soldier, watching your arrows find their mark, seeing Persian warriors fall, only to realize that their battle line never seemed to weaken. The Immortals had figured out how to make 10,000 mortal men appear genuinely immortal, and that illusion was worth more than any amount of additional training or superior equipment. And that brings us to perhaps the most intriguing question of all. Do we see echoes of the Immortals in our modern world? Are there military units today that derive their effectiveness as much from their reputation and mystique as from their actual capabilities? Think about elite military units in modern armies: the British SAS, the American Navy SEALs, the Israeli Sayeret Matkal. These units are undoubtedly skilled and well-trained, but part of their effectiveness comes from the aura of invincibility that surrounds them. Enemies hesitate, allies feel more confident, and conflicts sometimes resolve simply because everyone knows these forces are present. Like the ancient Immortals, these modern elite units understand that military effectiveness isn't just about individual skill or superior equipment. It's about creating a reputation so powerful that it becomes a weapon in itself. They maintain their mystique through careful selection, rigorous training, and yes, sometimes through a bit of theatrical flair that would have made the golden pomegranate-carrying Immortals proud. The Immortals showed us that the most powerful military force isn't necessarily the one with the best weapons or the most soldiers. It's the one that can combine genuine skill with psychological warfare, professional excellence with cultural significance, tactical flexibility with strategic vision. In the end, the Persian Immortals accomplished something that even Alexander's conquest couldn't destroy. They created a template for military excellence that has echoed through history. They showed that a military unit could be both a fighting force and a cultural institution, both a tactical asset and a symbol of national pride. Their influence can be seen in the Roman Praetorian Guard, in the Byzantine Varangians, in the Ottoman Janissaries, and yes, in the elite units of modern armies. The idea that a small group of highly trained, carefully selected, and properly equipped warriors could be worth far more than their numbers might suggest, that's pure immortal thinking. But perhaps their greatest legacy is more subtle. They proved that military excellence and cultural sophistication could go hand in hand. They showed that warriors could be poets, that soldiers could be artists, that the same hands that wielded deadly weapons could also appreciate fine wine and beautiful music. The Immortals fell at Gaugamela, but their spirit lives on in every military unit that strives for excellence. Every soldier who sees service as more than just a job. Every warrior who understands that true strength comes not from weapons or armor, but from the unbreakable bond between comrades who have pledged to stand together no matter what challenges they face. So what do you think? Were the Immortals legendary because of their genuine skill and training, or because they mastered the art of making themselves seem invincible? And in our modern world, where elite military units still capture our imagination and sometimes seem to possess that same aura of invincibility, are we seeing history repeat itself in new forms? The story of the Persian Immortals reminds us that the most powerful forces in history are often those that understand that true strength comes not from any single attribute, but from the perfect combination of skill, dedication, mystique, and an unwavering commitment to something greater than oneself. And don't forget to like the video, share it, and subscribe to Legacy of Empires for more legends, truths, and secrets from the ancient world.